Hi, my name is Moshe Kindler, and I'm the publisher of The Jewish Link,
Hi, this is Elizabeth Kratz. I'm editor of The Jewish Link.
and you're on the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting podcast. Elizabeth, it's the end of the second week of the war in Israel, and we have here a special guest who we were not sure would make it because we actually had a few other cancellations and postponements in terms of timing. We have here with us someone who came onto my radar screen really in the last few years. Actually, Matt came to the office back in June. His name is Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody. He's the executive director of Ematai, but he is way more than just that. Way more. I think I have a whole list of things that he's done, but I think I guess we'll go with the publisher first. He's a columnist in the Jerusalem Post and is trying to write for us more regularly as well. He is, besides being involved with Ematai, was the co-founder of the Tikva Overseas Academy, co-dean of the Tikva Overseas Academy. I was actually impressed also that he was a Maggid Shir in Hakotel for many years. Mm-hmm. So welcome, Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody.
It's great to be here with you guys. Thank you.
Welcome. I only got this yesterday, just so you know, because we're working double time, but I got a chance to review between 5 and 10 chapters of this massive book called A Guide to the Complex. Contemporary halachic debates, and it seems that you have a very strong and demonstrated command of the intersection between ethics and halacha, and that's your genre?
That's really an area of my specialty and interest. There's so many different areas where those types of ethical questions come up. With Ematai, I'm really focused, of course, on the medical ethics area, where more or less that's the most common application of some of these dilemmas. But certainly there are other areas as well. And unfortunately today we're feeling the military ethics questions in an acute manner.
And I saw at least 4 chapters, at least, I think there might be more on one side and the other, about specifically relating to Jews in wartime and the ethics of war, the ethics of hostages, the ethics of leaving Israel during wartime. All those kinds of things have, all this, massive halachic underpinnings and, commentary from our Rishonim. So we're very interested in that. We definitely want to focus on some of those things today, but also we want you to share some of the perspective. I know you flew in from Israel just now. I want to hear some of your thoughts about how things are going, what type of Jews there are in Israel today. I heard you just mentioned there are 2 types. So would you talk about that maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's trying times living in Israel right now, but what's amazing is there really are 2 types of Israelis right now. There are those who are on the front lines, soldiers, evacuees, ambulance drivers, whatever it might be. People are directly impacted by the actual war. And then there's everyone else who's trying to figure out how to help people in the first group. And it is just amazing to see the amount of volunteering, grilling food for people, bringing them down socks and underwear, driving people all over the country, everything that you can think of in any way that could be helped. I know many American Jews are sending appreciated items, right? It could be flashlights, it could be deodorant, tzitzit, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's really, I think it's, people really want to feel like they're helping in some ways because we all feel the acute crisis. And it's also a coping mechanism. I mean, we have had such a traumatic experience, which is, it took a while even to absorb how bad it was and is. And we're still, I think, processing that. But the best way to process tragedy is to try to do something good and affirm, I think, the meaning of life and your solidarity. And, as you know, Israel had a lot of tension and internal strains before Simchat Torah. And suddenly those things have, at least for now, evacuated. And people are just helping each other. Not evacuated.
You've been in Israel long enough.
Yes, evacuation's on people's minds. But those differences have evaporated, and people are just trying to help each other now.
Yeah. The Mi Kamcha Yisrael is also present in Chutz La'aretz and in the communities that we are writing about and representing in the Jewish Link communities. The tri-state area is just literally every single community, shul, rabbi, professional, teacher, student, every single person is doing what they can where they are. And there is anxiety, of course, but I think there's also a shared sense of purpose, which is, if there is a silver lining in this whole situation, it is that we realize we're all in the same boat, we're all on the same team, we are all fighting the same enemy.
I can tell you, people in Israel, and not just Anglos like myself, I may have lived in Israel for over 20 years, but people who live in Israel feel the support of the diaspora Jewry. I was just talking with my neighbors. Her husband is down right by Gaza now. He's in Sadir. He's always in the army, and she was saying to me how she's been really amazed, just support. I mean, our neighbors brought her over a deli platter that was sent from people from Boca Raton. And she's like, I don't even know where Boca Raton is, but thank you very much. This makes my Shabbat preparations all the more, easier. And you see it in the news. And, I talk to friends here in the States, and they're like, we're not sleeping. And, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Tell us that story you said of what you actually personally participated in. I just liked hearing it. I want our audience to hear how you're also a little bit in the volunteer effort and also connecting to the U.S. as well.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know if I was going to be coming in. I was on United, I had to read a book on El Al, but once I realized I was going to make it in, I asked around some friends, like, how can I help? And I thought I'd be bringing back stuff from the States to Israel, which I am. But someone said, I'm working with the Army Rabbinate, and there's a big demand among soldiers, religious and non-religious, to have tzitzit. And people in the States really want to help, and we just can't get the tzitzit out fast enough. And so people in the States said, well, we'll make them for you, but you need to have special colored tzitzit, because you can't wear white tzitzit. You have to wear green tzitzit. And so I brought 2 heavy, large duffel bags with me of bringing green tzitzit to be made by middle school students here in New York, I think in this case Ramaz, but other schools as well, which will then be brought back once they're made to the soldiers. And it's sort of like, it's crazy, but it's amazing. It's amazing.
It's beautiful.
I want you to know that those kids putting the tzitzis together, it is crazy, but I think they'll remember that they did something, and it's very powerful. So
it's therapy. It's making
coping,
people.
You said, yeah.
It's coping. It's making people feel like they have some involvement in this together situation that we're in. It's the beauty of it is that we are not confused. We do not have an ethical conflict at the moment about how to help. We know, though, that there are more thorny ethical conflicts going on in Israel, particularly in the South. And I wanted to talk to you about how and get your insight on the kinds of debates going on in terms of the very sad work of identifying bodies, the individuals who are the loved ones of those who are lost or missing, and what they're doing now, and how they're dealing, what moment they're in, so we can sort of share and understand that burden.
Yeah, I mean, the ethical dilemmas here are really great. We always have, of course, the ethical dilemmas of dealing with how we fight a just war. I'd say that there's no question in Israel about the necessity of this war. Occasionally in the previous operations, you'd feel that, why we're going to war now? We could have gone to war previously. Why are we doing it now? There's no debate about that. Left, right, center, doesn't matter. Everyone understands now why we're going to war. There is an interesting ethical question about, given the threat from the north, would we want to take that threat to, take to them first and to initiate, because we are very concerned about Hezbollah. But, you never know when you start something where that's going to land up. And it seems, at least right now, the hope is that this will only be a one-front, confrontation. But I'd say the biggest ethical question that people are sort of somewhat talking about, but it's very sensitive, is we've never had a war with a country where we have 200 of our own in captivity in that territory. And that's a super sensitive issue, because one approach says they're no different from any other citizen. Our goal is to protect our citizens wherever they are, and our focus should just be on fighting a decisive victory. But we all know Hamas doesn't play by any ethical rules. It wouldn't be surprising, it's pretty much expected, that Hamas is going to use our captives as human shields. I mean, you literally could have situations where you have 4-year-old babies handcuffed to Hamas leaders and say, you want to assassinate me? Kill this 4-year-old Jew. that's going to create all sorts of dilemmas. And it's one of those things where no one really wants to speak about publicly right now, but privately you hear people talking about it, right? How much do we have to be concerned with this? And that's really going to be, I think, one of the biggest ethical dilemmas I really have to think about.
Yeah. I see that you had a chapter in this book, The Guide to the Complex, chapter 83, called Redeeming POWs and Must We Release Hundreds of Terrorists to Fulfill This Mitzvah? So the question, of course, is what is Israel willing to give up to get back these hostages, assuming they're even alive? Which we also, there's this like doubt in everyone's mind, I think it's in yours too, probably, that anything that Hamas says could potentially be a lie. So do we believe there are hostages who are still alive right now?
Well, we know we have evidence only of one, but I think we believe that there are many that are still alive. There's no reason to think that some of the people who are taken seemingly in relatively good condition. Because of their brutality, they videotape people in Gaza, so we have some evidence of that. When it came in the past about the prisoner swaps, unfortunately, as I wrote about in the book, I think Israel, with good intentions, but gave a real incentive to taking prisoners, because we would, even for the sake of corpses, release hundreds, if not thousands in some cases, of terrorists. And so Hamas already announced, there are 6,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. You want your 200 back, release 6,000 prisoners. That's unfathomable. And so I think we're going to be in a situation where the notion of a prisoner swap here is going to be hard to swallow. It's hard to imagine. We, of course, have taken some of their members as captives, certainly the ones that we killed. We have their bodies. And it seems we've also taken some of them alive. But based on past history, Hamas knows and doesn't really care so much if they stay in captivity because they feel like they can get them out. And we have now this dilemma that we've sort of created for ourselves in some ways with good intentions, but we incentivize taking prisoners. Now, of course, we never imagined them doing this. I heard interviewed on the radio in Israel, the creator of Fauda TV show.
Yes, I saw that.
Avi Sakharov.
Yeah, and he's like, I could have drawn that up. I couldn't have, written this. And so the level of the enormity of the mess up here, put it mildly, is tremendous. And to the credit of the Israeli populace, there's very little talk, a little bit, but mostly little talk about who's to blame here. And the approach is, we're going to worry about that later on. So we have a real dilemma here. There's someone that wrote in the New York Times, in the op-ed in the New York Times this week, saying, Jewish tradition teaches that we always prioritize saving captives. And I think that's a terribly superficial read of Jewish tradition. Of course, we do care about saving the lives of our captives. We always have. But the dilemmas here are much greater. And I actually dedicated my column in Jerusalem Post today to precisely this issue. The historical evidence is much more nuanced, and it's going to be a big ethical question we have to ask right now.
Wait, my thought is someone who a little bit of studies military history. I don't think they can ask the question really. I think that I think there's the IDF has a goal. We have a goal, which is to eliminate Hamas, and everything becomes subordinate to it. Meaning, getting the captives on, as difficult as it sounds. That's what you have to kind of. There's a larger goal, and I think they've already announced that's the case.
That's my inclination on this as well. I think many Israelis feel that way. But there is this ethos in Israel, Medinat Yisrael Yaset Kol, right? Israel do everything. And I don't think we, though, imagined this type of scenario in which what that would entail. So I think you're right. I think they are going to prioritize defeating Hamas. And frankly, I think there's good reason to think that the only way to redeem as many of these captives as possible is to defeat Hamas.
Right.
And so it could be in this case, the dilemma isn't as great because we just understand that it's victory that's going to ultimately bring these people to freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I keep asking myself, other than what we can do. I think what we can do also is provide a message at this point, a teaching opportunity for our children, and to share stories of the goodness and the kindness involved in caring for hostages, caring for these individuals. It's this idea that to have to explain this to our children, which we're having to do at our Shabbat table tonight. How can we tell our children about what the IDF has to do now?
Yeah, I mean, we feel in Israel as well. My youngest is 7, my next is 10. And, they're during the day, they're doing okay. At night, the nightmares come about, hostage takers and making sure all the doors are locked. And there's a lot of fear. And I live in a relatively, safe as it goes area of Israel. We haven't had as many sirens as other areas. So there's a tremendous amount of anxiety and fear. And unfortunately, one of the things we have to teach our kids in a hard way is that there's evil in this world. And that is something which we have to understand, that there's evil, and we have to uproot that evil of the world. And unfortunately, I think parts of the Western world have sort of lost sight of a little bit of that, of this notion of good and evil, right? Things are relativistic, and, you have to look from their perspectives, and there are two sides to every story. And at some point, though, and I think we're at that point, we need to be able to teach our kids there's right and wrong and good and evil. And part of the message here is to teach them that we want to be on the side of the good people that are uprooting evil. And unfortunately, they're not going to get that in a lot of the universities.
No.
And you see this, and it's actually being covered in Israel. You see in the general Israeli news, they're talking about what's going on in the American universities, all these stories. It's something which is getting coverage in Israel, of course, getting a lot of coverage here as well. And it's something which is somewhat depressing to see that. But part of what we're trying to teach our kids is, that we have to uproot evil, but we also want to give them a sense of there's goodness in the world, and showing the amount of care that we give to each other that we're getting from abroad is part of that message as well. I think it's comforting to people to knowing that there are good people, Jews and non-Jews alike, around the world who care about Israel right now.
Yeah. That is the message. That's a message that our paper is trying to give. We also feel like, and our avodah at the moment is to not only bring the news, and we are bringing a great deal of news, but also to be cognizant that children comprise a great percentage of the readers of our paper. And including my own, who read the paper cover to cover, and they're like, "Mom, what does this mean? What am I looking at? What is that picture? What are we talking about?" So the idea that our children need to be presented with our reality, with nuance, with basically asking them to be wise beyond their years now. This isn't a black and white story.
Yeah, but there's a real interesting ethical dilemma here for journalists. I'm sure you feel it, which is how much do we expose and how much do we publicize some of these terrible
big
videos?
issue for us.
So a friend of mine, that's actually very interesting. Thank you for that hook. A friend of mine said to me in the first days following it, she couldn't look away. She felt like she had to show her children, the youngest of whom is 4, that this is what the bad guys did to Jews like us. And she showed them. And I was not good with that. And I was not willing to do that for my children. And the idea was, for me, I don't think a child can comprehend the level of monstrous barbarism that was present. Even if I can't comprehend it, and I have I'm 49 years old, I've seen whatever I've seen from the world, but I've not existed in a wartime bubble. I haven't lived in a war zone. How can I understand this? How can I ask my child to understand it? How can I even ask them to read about it, other than to tell them the facts that they killed our people? They were barbaric, they were horrible, and the Jews have no choice.
So it's an interesting dilemma here, because I think for us, just knowing that fact is enough. Meaning, I don't really need to see pictures of people being, beheaded or things like that, right? To know that. I don't need to see that. And frankly, as a Jewish value, I think that there's an element which says that we shouldn't be exposed to that. I mean, in halacha, when you see someone die, you're supposed to tear kriya, you're supposed to rip your clothing. And we've lost that sensitivity because of, Facebook and social media of seeing people die, that this is a horrific thing, that we should literally tear kriya over. But unfortunately, it seems that it's taken these videos and pictures and bringing reporters literally into Kfar Aza and Tibet and other places like this, and to have them broadcast from these places to make the world understand who we're dealing with. And that's an interesting dilemma, because I think the IDF for the first time has brought in Anderson Cooper and right from CNN and all these other people and said, come film from here. Show the world what happened here. And there is something very powerfully effective of that. Sadly, it takes those videos and those images to impact the world. And so I think that, I know in our home, we're doing a lot to try to, we can't block this out from our kids entirely, of course, particularly my older kids. But, we are being sensitive to this issue. The schools in Israel sent that whole thing. Delete TikTok, delete Instagram, especially because we're anticipating that Hamas is going to start releasing other graphic videos as well. And I think it's important for not only for kids, but for adults as well. At the same time, it's like my mother-in-law. She's a daughter of Holocaust survivors. So she said to me, sometimes Jews need to see and understand what anti-Semites and hateful people are going to do to us.
100%. I think if you think about the images that I remember of the Shoah, the Holocaust, I think all of us saw it's people burned skeletons in ovens, bodies stuck, stacked like cords. To me, like those, I actually disagree, Elizabeth. I was exposed. I think anyone. I'm a third generation. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors. To me, the images that stay with me from the Shoah are those images from the death camps. They stay with me now and I'm in between. I think there's a value not just for the world but for us to see them, because those are the images that are really seared into my memory. They're hard, but I'm actually not. I'm not against. I know it sounds crazy, but I believe we should see them. So because you're not going to forget.
It's a dilemma. It's a dilemma in my mind.
One of the things that's special about you is I think in many ways you're very much about bringing the Whenever I read a bio of yours, it's about making Torah text accessible. I'm going to ask what does the Torah actually what can we take away? I'm saying to give it to our Torah a little bit. Let's say what does the Torah have to tell us, or our primary sources or secondary sources? What is it about this time? Because most of our readers probably will not be reading your book. Okay, hopefully they'll read some of your pieces in our paper. But what does the Torah have to tell us at a time like this? And maybe even if I didn't don't mean to put you on the spot, but just I'm sure you have something. A lot of people are talking about Noah, Parshas Noah, Hamas. Tell us what does the Torah have to tell us about this? So.
Right, it is apropos for Parsha Noah as well. It's actually my bar mitzvah parsha, although I spoke at my bar mitzvah drasha about abortion and suicide and Jewish thought. I did have a happy childhood. I don't know why you're asking.
Whoa.
But
how would you speak at your bar mitzvah?
Age 13?
It might be a coincidence that my father was a distinguished bioethicist, and it was Shiva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and that was the connection.
Okay, thank you for reminding about your yichus. Yes. Okay.
I think with this issue and with many other issues of ethics, the Torah has a number of different values that we need to care about. And certainly one of those values is about defeating evil. We learned this from Amalek. We should not apply Amalek literally to this situation or other situations. Amalek doesn't exist anymore on a physical level. The formal mitzvah does not exist. But the notion of saying that we have an obligation to defeat and uproot evil is very real, and it's important to keep that in mind. But the Torah has other values as well. Part of the values that we live with and exist with are the notion that all human beings are created b'tselem Elohim and the dignity of image of God, and we should care about that. We should care about that a lot. We should care about that because we don't want to kill people who don't deserve to be killed. We should care about that a lot also because it's bad for our soldiers who want to kill the people that need to be killed, but don't want to kill, babies and children and whatnot. It's a terribly traumatic experience when you feel that you've killed someone that didn't need to be killed. And sometimes that happens, of course. There's no such thing as pristine warfare. But it's important for us to remember those values. I think also we need to hold out hope for a world that's a redeemed world. And the power of the idea of Mashiach, of redemption, is important to remember. In Parshat Noach, the power of the rainbow, of the image of the rainbow. And the Ramban there says that the rainbow used to face one direction. Now it's being turned. The keshet in Hebrew is like a bow. It's being turned in the other direction to say that there's a world in which there's a world after the deluge. There's a world after the flood. And it's important to keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, I think that one of the other values that's really important here is we are a people. We need to appreciate our peoplehood here, which means also prioritizing saving ourselves and our people. And those values that we have here, on the one hand, we want to prioritize our needs. On the other hand, we don't want to kill non-combatants, innocent people. But when push comes to shove, the priority when you go to war is between two different collectives. And that's the message you see throughout the Torah. I think that some of the human rights activists today, who have good intentions, who try to emphasize all these notions of, well, how is it possible that you would kill a terrorist, but know that you're also going to kill non-combatants along with them as collateral damage? And I think the answer of the Torah is warfare is a collective entity. And so while we want to maximize the number of combatants that we kill and minimize the number of enemy non-combatants that we kill, at the end of the day, these are wars between nations. And that's a notion that we have to keep in mind here right now. Unfortunately, warfare involves very difficult decisions that have to be made. But if we try to keep these in balance with each other and always try to keep them in mind, but understand that in war we need to prioritize our people, protecting our forces, protecting our citizens, I hope that will help us here achieve a decisive victory. And I think that this is one of those things which we've lost track of with asymmetric warfare, with these warfare against terrorist groups, whether it's in Afghanistan or Iraq or in Lebanon and Gaza, which is that we've stopped believing in the notion of victory, that we can actually defeat an enemy. And we have to figure out what our goals are here going to be. But we should aim right now for victory, not just pushing them back, but that we're going to have to actually destroy the threat from the south. And I think the Torah understands and wants us to emphasize this idea of saying that there's evil that needs to be defeated. And in that respect, we have to be careful, of course, because religion, when you take only that value, you can lead to a lot of fundamentalism. And I think the definition in my mind of fundamentalism is when you prioritize only one value. And the Torah speaks about many values, and the goal of our leaders is to try to think about and take into account and consideration all of those values at once. That, I think, is a nuanced message which is not easy to translate and transmit on Facebook and social media and the news, but is part of our educational goal and mission right now. And I think and believe that if we think in those terms, we'll be in a good place at the end of the day. And the other message, of course, I think we need to think about is with all of our hishtadlut, with all of the efforts we make, we need to pray. We need to pray. I mean, these are very, very difficult times. I've lived in Israel over 20 years. I don't remember anything like this at all. And you talk to people that are around the Yom Kippur War, 50 years ago, of course, everyone's talking about that comparison. I don't even think it's comparable to that because of the sheer numbers of people that were killed in one day, civilians taken captive. And so there's a lot of prayer that we need to be doing right now. And obviously we need our hishtadlus as well, but don't minimize the importance of prayers also.
Just going back to the first thing you said, you're talking about a concept called Torah Zahav, purity of arms. I think that's I think meaning that's the idea of
Torah Neshek.
Torah Neshek. Correct. Thank you. I think it's something that I grew up believing. I think just that the IDF is not necessarily a halachic army, but it is a moral army. I think that's something that I know that they consult with halacha, with Torah sources, but it's not a halachic army. It's a moral. That's if you have anything more to say on like the idea, because I think a lot of our, for the Dati Lumi community, religious community, Chardali, Haredi community, how the IDF kind of operates, how our army operates. From a Torah perspective, non-Torah perspective, non-halachic perspective.
Torah and Neshek originated this idea in the 30s already, actually, before the state was founded. It was an idea that said that we're not going to have reprisal or revenge killings of Arabs that were rioting in 36 to 39. There is certainly some value to that, and the notion of saying that we have limits to the way we fight is very important. Whether or not the IDF's Torah and Neshek gets that balance right is an open discussion. I think in more recent years, the IDF has taken an approach which is popular in many academic and ethical circles, which is well-intentioned, which says that the soldiers have to endanger themselves to a pretty significant degree to avoid civilian casualties. And here there's been pushback, and both in the ethical world and certainly in the religious world on that issue. And I think that's correct, that we need to recalibrate the balance here. We don't believe in carpet bombing. We're not looking just to not risk, bomb away with no risk at all to our soldiers. We do send in ground forces. We do believe that our soldiers have to take a certain amount of risk. But that said, the error should be on the side of force protection. And so, the classic case, you have 3 buildings, terrorists are there with guns waiting to shoot at you, and one of them, 2 others have civilians in it. Well, you have two options at this point. Do you send in your ground troops door to door, risking them, of course, because one of those doors has terrorists ready to shoot at them, or do you tell them to back off and send them artillery or something else to shoot all 3 buildings? This is a big dilemma. I literally actually debated this issue with a leading philosopher on this issue earlier this week, and he said Israel should send in the ground troops, and I said Israel should be sending in the artillery. We should not be risking our soldiers in those cases when there's an acute risk, when there's a definitive risk. There are some techniques the IDF has developed, actually, where instead of going through the front door, they sort of blast through the side door, which catches them off guard. And there's even attempts of mini drone cameras to send in ahead right now. Meaning we're trying to have the best of both worlds in some ways. And again, I'm all in favor of trying to avoid civilian casualties. If you can do both, win, right? Kill the terrorists, but avoid civilian casualties, that's great. But when push comes to shove and you have to choose between risking your soldiers in an acute way or the risk of civilian casualties, we should be protecting our soldiers. And I think halacha speaks of this and prioritizes that. The rabbinic community in Israel, I think, is on that side as well. The IDF, is balancing a lot of those values. Obviously, the IDF wants to protect their soldiers as well. And I think that Torah and Neshek is a good value to have, but we need to think long and hard about exactly how we apply it.
If we could, this isn't exactly lightening the topic a little, but moving to a different ethical conflict that Jews are facing now in America is we have probably 1,000 or more kids who study in Israeli seminaries and yeshivot every year, at least 1,000. I don't know if that's the right number. Six, how many thousand? For our area, would you say? Anyway, a lot of the conversation now has among parents who have children there in Israel now is whether they should bring them home in wartime. And I noticed you had a chapter about that in your book, and I wondered if you could speak to the kinds of efforts that can or should be made on the part of Jews who are in Israel who are from Chutz La'aretz, and also maybe the ethical dilemmas we all face about whether we should get up and go and help or not. Whether there are people who can, Dov Hiken just came back or just called in from touring the South with individuals. Do we all have a responsibility to get up and move, to get up and go?
So I'll start with the gap year students, the Shana Aleph students. I was a Rebbe in Yeshivat Kotel for 10, 11 years. And of course, every case is individual, and you have individual circumstances. I'm not being judgmental of anyone. Really, I'm not. I have some family members even who went back. But by and large, the kids that are there for a year or two are in pretty relatively safe areas. You have at least 90 seconds to get to a bomb shelter. The yeshivot and midrashot, the seminaries, yeshivas, they have bomb shelters there. They're not really in a tremendous amount of danger. I know when you look at it from afar, it seems like that is, but they're really not. And on an educational level, I personally think that's of great value to people who are planning to be there for the year to stay and be a part of the fate of the Jewish people. This is what it means to be a Jew. I had some family members and others who were there for Sukkot, right? And so they were feeling really bad about leaving. And I said to them, but listen, you have a job. You have your livelihood is there. You weren't planning on staying. Right? It's a different type of scenario. But if your plans were to be there for the entire year and you're in a relatively safe area, I think you should stay. Now, again, I don't know what's going to be. It could be we're going to have a 5-front war with Hezbollah and Yudav Shomron, and it could be, it could get really tricky. And then, obviously, I don't know what will be, right? That could be more dangerous. But certainly right now, I don't see any of these students in acute danger. I'll admit I'm, even a little bit disappointed about the numbers of people going back. I'm not judging anyone. I don't think that there's no need to judge anyone. It's not like the students being there are like critical for the war effort, but it says something a little bit. And ultimately, Israel is the motherland. It's not Disneyland. I think that was Rabbi Riskin's quip, and I think he's totally right about that. And I think American Jews feel Israel as the motherland, but sometimes they experience it as Disneyland. We come, we have restaurants, and that's great.
Camel rides.
Exactly, camel rides, right? That type of thing. And again, I'm not being critical at all. Like, American Jews are so supportive. They so identify with it. But I do feel that it would be a good, and I want to give a yasher koach and chazak v'amatz to those students and their families who've kept their kids in the year. In terms of American coming to Israel, so sure, you want to come, you want to give support, and especially have family members there and whatnot. That's great. I don't think there's any reason for people to come per se just to be there when they're going to be sitting in their house not doing much. But if you have something to contribute to, I think for people who have family in Israel and you come to visit them and you give them a little bit of chizuk for a few days and you turn around, that's going to mean a lot to them.
Yeah, we did hear, like, I in my spare time, I write a lot about the Israeli wine industry. Yeah. It's one of my favorite topics in the paper. So this whole week I was just speaking to one after another of these empty businesses and people who are running. They're like the one guy left who's over 50 who wasn't conscripted back to the draft, or the nurse wife of a garagiste winemaker whose husband is a commander in the South, and she's literally making wine right now because the fermentation ended. It's after harvest. She has to start making the wine with nothing, with no background. So if there were efforts on the ground in America of individuals to help and be of use in terms of assisting businesses from collapse, that's something that I think Jews in our area are thinking about, especially recent retirees who feel like they're not actively working and actively, their parnasa wouldn't acutely drop off if they went for a few months. That's sort of an idea that people are playing around with, I think.
There are a lot of ideas out there right now. I mean, initially there was this false rumor, actually, that there was a shortage of healthcare professionals, and there are these requests.
I heard that.
Bring in the doctors, and I'm in direct touch with the people Nefesh B'Nefesh who are running. It's what? Slow down here, right? You can't just show off a plane and start doing surgery in Hadassah, right? I don't want that, right? So, but that was one type of initiative. I actually was off because of my work at Ematai. I have a lot of contact with doctors, and a few mental health professionals said, well, maybe we can do telehealth and offer some mental health support to people, which is an interesting idea that's being floated. And certainly the Israeli economy is being hit. I mean, you have 360,000 people in reserve duty right now. That's complicated. And, I think if we can get to a point where we have a sense of our needs and can figure out, that'll be very good. I mean, listen, the amount of money and other efforts have been coming from the diaspora now have been tremendous. I think it would take probably a good idea to like take a quick pause and see, okay, after this first initial push, what is it that we can do in a systematic, organized manner to actually help Israel? What are Israel's needs? Now, of course, we don't know. Are we talking about a 2-week war? Are we talking about 6 months?
Right.
We don't know.
Right. So none of us being Nevi'im, what organizations are working on this kind of idea? Is it the Jewish Agency for Israel? Is it Nefesh B'Nefesh? Is it individual local charities that are partnered with ones in Israel? How can we maximize our impact? I know this isn't specifically a question for you, but as an Israeli citizen.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a lot of great organizations, a lot of good intentioned people right now trying to help out. Of course, you have like the federations here and whatnot, and there is a real advantage to that because they're centrally focused, they bring a lot of money, and they're in deep coordination with the Israeli government where that needs to go. So I saw, for example, New York's federation is dedicating a certain amount of money to help people in the South. Right? That's the type of thing which needs to be done in an orchestrated, systematic manner. And so there's a lot of advantage to that. There's some organizations which we're trying to bring in like armored vest and bulletproof vest and whatnot. And that's one of those situations where, first of all, it raised a lot of questions, of course. Like, what does this mean? The IDF doesn't have this. And the IDF said, well, we do have it. But then people on the ground were saying, I'm in Gaza or on the Gaza border. I don't
have it.
Right. And so, there are a lot of open questions there, but we've had time to see now who can really be helpful. And so whoever you want to support, you want to make sure whatever you're giving the money for, that they can prove that they have the means to get this done, right? To actually really be helpful. Rav Rimon, in Sulamot, did a great, and he's got a lot of connections with the army to bring in certain things. They're bringing vest initially. Then I think now they're working on drones, actually. It's sort of mind-boggling. But you can't buy a phone battery right now in Israel. I was at the phone store getting my phone fixed before I came in. All the portable chargers totally sold out. Totally sold out because they sent them all down to all these soldiers who were rushed out.
And they need chargers.
Wow. Right. So, but you can't bring those in in your luggage because that causes lithium issues and whatnot. So what I'd say to people is, you do it wisely. I've been volunteering a little bit with a Modi'in-based group called Grilling for the IDF, which is providing a lot of food and meals, and I think it's been a great organization, and there are others as well. And just make sure whoever you're donating to can show you that they can deliver on the promise.
Mm-hmm. When you say grilling for the IDF, so they're going to a certain base, they're going to...
logistically, 360,000 people were brought in, and the Army, frankly, wasn't ready to feed all these people. And so this was an organization that existed before the war began, and they would do it as like a chupar, as they say. It's a nice little treat, they bring a barbecue to a base. And all of a sudden now they're making like 6,000 meals a day. We're driving them all over the country, to the north, to the south, to Hebron. And you literally have a group of like 10, 12 people who are sitting, it was in someone's backyard, literally. Now they moved it to a show with a little bigger parking lot. Or just sitting there all day, grilling hamburgers. And they make a nice meal and they bring it down to people. But they're organizing all sorts of other things as well. And again, now at this point, it's not necessarily an essential thing because the Army is catching up with the needs. But, as you go along here, it's going to be critical to try to help people out. Occasionally, it was really literally, they just didn't have the food. They didn't have a meal for them. And sometimes, of course, it's just like a nice little treat, which, if you've been sitting in the South for 10 days and you're waiting to go in, it's nice to feel that, TLC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we did see that because everything was unfolding in real time. I think they were 4.5 days in, and we talked about this on our last podcast. I think that 4.5 days in, the guys going in to Gaza and coming back from operations, not to Gaza, but like to the border towns, going out on ops, coming back, the back end of all of the things that has to happen in wartime to make sure a base is fully stocked, to make sure that meals for hundreds are ready to go when those people come back from base. There was sort of this moment when Grilling for the IDF was like we need 6 cars full of grills, we're going. And they just went, and they just said, someone, can you put a grill in your car? You're bringing stuff to the kids. Can you take a grill, take this huge box of hamburger, whatever it is. And so there was like a moment there that we saw a need there filled.
And it's still going on. I mean, I'm on Israelis live on WhatsApp. So I'm on all these.
We've noticed.
Yes, for better and for worse. And I'm on all these WhatsApp groups, and it'll be like, okay, we need a driver from Modi'in to Kiryat Shimona up in the north. Okay, that's not a short drive. Right? I would volunteer, like 10 minutes later when I saw it, there are 5 people that are volunteering before me.
Right.
And that just shows you, that's what I was saying beforehand, there's so much of an effort right now that people just want to help and be a part and contribute. So I think that's a good thing, and we just need to be. There's a lot of money and effort, so let's try to do this well because we want to be most efficient.
I saw a nice meme which I think we published, which is basically you mentioned about drones. So apparently the call for drones has gone, and I also don't really understand it why. A commercial, like a small drone, would be useful, but you think they would need to be like ruggedized or some other higher level. So the fellow's asking for a drone. He said, the IDF officer says, you won't ever see your drone back. So he said, yeah, I know that, but just make sure you come back. Right. So
right. Well, the other cartoon that's going around is you see the IDF soldiers going into Gaza, and they're all totally overweight. Because they've been eating all of these snacks that are being sent to them.
Right. So, there's also another joke about food that was the Israeli soldiers asked the Ashkenazim to stop sending food. They're suffering enough as it is. So, but to end, can you talk to us about your book that you are hopefully finishing up? So we can make sure we get that into people's consciousness, and the topics are so relevant for now.
Yeah, so the book's called Ethics of Our Fighters. It's obviously a play on Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot. We usually think of Jewish moral teachings more like along the lines of Pirkei Avot. The last 100 years, we've been facing the dilemmas of warfare, and what I've tried to do in a systematic manner is to present the Jewish teaching on military ethics. But it's not meant to be a dry philosophy book. It's meant to actually tell the story, more or less chronologically, of how Jews and their leaders and their rabbis approached these issues. And why did Judaism reject pacifism, which is very tempting to them a lot? Why did Judaism reject total war, which is unlimited warfare, right? Amalek, if you want to, and all sorts of other phenomena going along the way. And I try to tell the story of the debates between the Etzel and other underground groups, before the before the state was founded, the debates over going to war, and of course, 6-Day War, 56 War, whether you should preemptively attack, and try to sort of systematically teach Jewish thoughts, insights on these topics, but also tell what I believe is a tremendously powerful tale. Because let's remember, Jews didn't have to deal with these dilemmas for many centuries. And we started to deal with these now, and all of the questions of what are our sources, what are our precedents, which is so important in halacha, I'm not saying they were absent, but they certainly weren't as well developed as other areas of law. And so it's a tremendous story about how we've developed these ideas. And the book is done. We were sort of like, we're getting it done, whatever. We weren't thinking of such a rush. And but once Simchat Torah passed, I called up the people of Magid, and obviously we all agree we want to try to get it out there. We're expediting it. Hopefully even the online version will be available before the print version.
Oh, wow.
It takes time to print these days. But ultimately, this isn't about selling books. It's not about making money. You don't make money off book of sales in this market.
We're aware.
Yes. But what I hope we can do is to present the tools and to people, to give them some insights from our sages, from our tradition, which whether or not they'll convince others, at least we should understand for ourselves what we're fighting for, why we're fighting, and how we're fighting. And that's really important. We should understand ourselves that we have a Masorah, we have a tradition on these issues, and we should be firm in our beliefs and try to articulate them in a way which others will find compelling. But even if we don't convince others, at least we should know for ourselves what we believe in. And it's amazing, actually, because certainly since the State of Israel was founded, there have been many rabbinic articles written on these topics and different aspects. How do you keep, halacha, how you keep Shabbat, or dealing with agunot in the wartime, all these issues. But there isn't really a systematic book that tries to go from the basics, right? Why do we fight? When do we fight? How do we fight? In either Hebrew or in English. So the book is going to be out in English hopefully next few weeks, so the online version, and it's being translated to Hebrew as well. And
when do you think it'll be? When do you think hitting the shores in the United States? You think December, November?
Yeah, I mean it's the end of beginning of December, sort of the goal right now, and we're trying to expedite it every way we can.
It's sort of like, not to be callous, but it's sort of, you're hitting a zeitgeist at the moment, and I'm personally looking forward to your book, because I think that the book that I looked at here, where I really only had a couple of hours to sit with it, you have your sources very calmly and clearly laid out. I can go look at my source material very much easily, like Bava Basra, Brachos, wherever it is, and the names of the Rishonim who debated these topics. And I assume that your next book will also be in the same with the same level of detail, which is useful for people who are thinking about these topics very seriously.
So I do try to make it detailed and to bring in the sources, but there is a little bit more of a leaning and pushing here to make it very readable and to tell a story. The book is really told as a tale, because I think that's what's most compelling here. But there are many, many footnotes, which we're doing now as footnotes, actually as endnotes, because I want to make it reader-friendly.
So it's actually funny you should say that, because I have a literal love-hate relationship with footnotes.
We fight about it all the time.
I love footnotes when I'm learning Tanakh. I love all of the little comments of the Rishonim that came in there, and I love to then look at that comment and go to the library in my house and check and go deep and just go down the rabbit hole. This is something I enjoy doing in my spare time as I'm learning Torah. However, in the newspaper, as the editor of this paper, I find footnotes to be very hard to read. The font goes tiny. I'm like, listen, I need a magnifying glass, not a pair of reading glasses. So I do have a love-hate relationship with footnotes, but in the case of a book, there's a place. So I hope you are able to sort of balance that. And even if we were to reprint any of your pieces or excerpt, I would hope that we would have the explanations in the text. That would be my preference.
I'm also going to commit to you that when as you get closer to publication, we're happy to do something from.
Yeah, I would love to excerpt something as specifically these topics which are of great interest to our community right now, and people who are sitting with this topic. We need a nuanced debate and complexity and of understanding that there is nothing new under the sun.
I'd say one of my goals of all the things I try to write is to show to people that the Torah has something profound to say about the ethical dilemmas that we face. Now, primarily in my work at Ematai, we're focusing on end-of-life issues and aging and other medical materials, where again, it's very meaningful for people to think that whether we can argue, and there are obviously machlokot and disagreements about certain issues, but to understand that the Torah, halacha, has something profound to say about these issues. And the same thing is true when it comes to running a state, and the same thing is true about war, and the same thing is true in many other areas. I think that for many people of all sort of religious affiliations and understandings, it's valuable for them to see that Judaism can speak in a sophisticated voice. One of the things I find actually most valuable and most inspiring for me is when I have someone who's not necessarily committed to halacha, but who reads something I write or hears me speak and says, that gave me something to think about. And I feel like that's my shlichut, that I can tell people and teach people that you should understand that the Torah has something wise to say to the dilemmas that we face. And it's painful in this circumstance because the dilemmas are so acute and so difficult and so just heart-wrenching in a lot of different ways. But the Torah also teaches us about war in particular, and Sefer Dvarim tells us, don't be fearful, right? There's a certain sense you should understand that you're doing the right thing, even though it involves killing. And one of the most beautiful midrashim, we have it both with Avraham and Yaakov, is that in different times when they have to fight, the Medrash describes how both Avraham and Yaakov were hesitant and they were nervous. And Rashi quotes these midrashim and says they were nervous about killing someone illicitly. And the message from God is, it's good to be nervous to kill someone illicitly, but chazak ve'amatz, you can do this, right? This, in this circumstance, this is permissible. Those are the types of warriors we want to try to create. Those are the types of Jews we want to create, who understand the dilemmas, who've thought them through, and appreciate the wisdom of the Torah in guiding them in these circumstances. So I hope, whether it's my first book or this book or the work at Ematai that we're doing, that we can help spread that message, which on a personal level is why I really feel a sense of a mission for.
Thank you for being here.
Keep on spreading the message. Thank you. And Hatzlacha.
Thank you so much.
Shabbat shalom. Thanks for being with us on the Jewish Link Pitch Meeting podcast. If you would like to participate or be in touch with us in any way, please email us at editor@jewishlink.news and follow us and find our podcast wherever you find podcasts.